So with that, I'm going to introduce our keynote today, and I want to thank Shane for sending a headshot that actually looks like him. I think we got some folks' high school graduation pictures, but Shane, thank you for that. I actually recognized you when you walked in, so well done.
I wore the same tie.
Same tie and everything, well put. Shane is the Chief Privacy Officer for FireEye. He created and manages their global privacy program designed to protect the data of FireEye customers and their employees. He leads their government affairs team as well, which I think the policy that you push is to make the world safer from cyber criminals and hackers, and so we've got somebody who's actually doing something. What have you guys done today? All right, with that, ladies and gentlemen, Shane McGee, thank you. Round of applause.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Good morning, everybody. So I am FireEye's Chief Privacy Officer. Just to give you a little bit of context, since I'm going to be talking a lot about security, I'm also a security professional, and I was general counsel for a company called Mandiant, another information security company that was acquired by FireEye a couple years ago. So as Chief Privacy Officer, and I feel justified in bringing this up, considering the title of the conference is the Cyber Risk and Privacy Liability Forum. So this morning at about 2 a.m., my phone started ringing off the hook. Does any other privacy professionals here? I saw the IAPP outside. Are they in here? Okay, a few. All right, what was the big news this morning? I'm sure everybody got the same emails I did. All right, the safe harbor was struck down. For those of you that don't know what the safe harbor is, the safe harbor is a framework between the United States and the European Union that allows the U.S. to receive personal information from the EU, from EU residents. Without the safe harbor, it's going to be a very difficult process to export that information from the EU to the U.S. and could be a real disruption to commerce. But the European Court of Justice early this morning struck that down. So I think you're going to be hearing a lot more about that. There's going to be a lot of serious scrambling for those companies in the United States that rely on the safe harbor to do business in Europe. FireEye being one. There are other things you can do, but the safe harbor has been in place for many, many years, so this is going to be quite a big deal for everyone. And unless cooler minds prevail, I think we're going to have a major disruption in business. So if you see your Chief Privacy Officer today, hug him or her. It's a tough day. So I digress a little bit. We're here mostly to talk about cyber risk. Everybody here is involved in managing risk to some extent, and cyber seems to be the flavor of the day. In fact, I think cyber is going to be the flavor of the day going forward for quite a while. To address a risk adequately, to be able to transfer it, to be comfortable with it, to be able to, with some reasonable certainty of likelihood that a loss will occur and the scope of that loss, we have to understand that risk. So I'm going to start out, and I hope to hit on some of the points that we're going to be in the movie, talking about the risk we're facing in the cyber realm. And I'll talk just a little bit first about the threat landscape. So this year, in the United States alone, we're going to have 5 billion devices connected to the internet. 5 billion. By the year 2020, we're going to have 25 billion devices hooked up to the internet. Each one of these devices is a potential entry point for an attacker, a hacker. And together, these entry points, these 25 billion, just 5 years from now, make up what we in the security industry refer to as the attack surface. That's where we're vulnerable to attacks. But the attack surface isn't just growing across the number of devices. The attack surface is also growing with the types of communication, the types of interaction that we have online. Every day, there's a new social media network, a new photo sharing application, video sharing, a new chat application, or just integration between the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of applications we have now. As both the devices increase and these types of applications increase, our attack surface grows significantly. We are, in large part, victims of our own innovation and our own growth. I moved to Silicon Valley about a year ago, just after the acquisition, FireEye's acquisition of Mandiant. And I got a much closer look at some of the innovation happening in today's technology world. And it's amazing how fast these people move. The energy, the creative energy, the innovation in Silicon Valley is absolutely fantastic. The problem is security is slow. Security is hard. Security is expensive. So while these people are off and running, take their VC money, try to create these new applications, security is only now even an afterthought. Previously, it wasn't even that much. So with the growing attack surface and this lack of attention to security, we have a major problem. We have what I call the security gap. Security gap, on the one hand, the attack surface, on the other hand, our ability and willingness to address the attack surface. So let's quantify this risk. General Keith Alexander, previous head of the NSA and commander of Cybercom, in 2012, 3 years ago, gave the following statistics. U.S. companies lose about $250 billion a year through intellectual property theft, another $114 billion through cybercrime. Now, if you factor in the amount of time systems are down, remediation of these issues and other things, that adds another, or that rises to $338 billion just on the cybercrime side. I'm not good at math, but I did do the addition here, and that's $588 billion a year in damages just here in the United States. And that was in 2012. And let me tell you, things have gotten quite a bit worse since 2012. So one of the quotes, and I'm probably, you've heard this before, but again, General Keith Alexander said that this loss, this continuing loss, constitutes the greatest transfer of wealth in human history. Anybody want to try to manage that risk? Okay, good. Good for you. I'm glad I don't have to. I mean, I manage it from a company-to-company basis, but you guys are the ones writing these policies and doing the underwriting. So, who's responsible? And it's funny, when I got to Mandiant, when I actually went, I led the cybersecurity and privacy practice at the firm that is now Denton. So I was outside counsel to Mandiant for a number of years, and then I went in-house as general counsel. When I got there, I was shocked to see every one of our customers, when we talked to them, when they were hit, when they were compromised, their first question wasn't, how do we get rid of this? What did they steal? They were more concerned with who it was. There's this very visceral reaction when you're hacked. Who did it? Who can I go after? How can I enact some sort of revenge, or at least get that attribution? Know who's coming after you. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about who's coming after you. Contrary to Hollywood's stereotypical depiction, hackers are not always suburbanite teens sitting in their parents' basement. There are generally 4 types of attackers that you need to worry about. The first, and by far the foremost these days, are nation-state attackers. And when I say nation-state attackers, I generally mean China. 95% of attacks from nation-states, which represent virtually every big attack you've seen in the headlines, are from China. When I say it's the nation-state acting, these are people that are supported by or directly employed by the Chinese government. A lot of them are wearing Chinese military uniforms when they engage in these attacks. So why is that a big deal? Governments have been spying on each other forever. I'm sure we spy on the Chinese spy on us. It's a big deal because the Chinese take the information that they get both from the U.S. government but also more and more from U.S. enterprises and other Western companies. It's not just the U.S. that's a target. They take that information and they give it to their own industry. They take the intellectual property, they take the industrial information, they take important business information, bid data. We've seen bid data being taken quite a bit so they can underbid U.S. companies, European companies on big projects. And they give it to their own industry so they can compete unfairly. That's why it's a big deal. And that's why we've had the greatest transfer of wealth in human history. In 2013, Mandiant released a report called the APT-1 report. We had been tracking hundreds of Chinese attack groups over the years, and it seemed that nobody really understood what was happening, the scope of the problem. We wanted to start a discussion at the political level, the diplomatic level. So we published that report, and things went crazy. It was front page in the New York Times. Everybody kind of realized at that point that it was China, and everybody was absolutely amazed at the scope of the problem that we had. But what they didn't see in that report was that that was one single attack group. Again, we track hundreds of Chinese attack groups and hundreds of other attack groups that may very well be associated with China, but we're not positive. That was one attack group. The scope of this is amazing. China has tens of thousands of people dedicated to hacking in their intelligence agencies, military, and government supported outside of the military. So, they've been stealing this type of information, industrial information, competitive business information, using it against Western industry, and now they've moved on to a different type of information. They're building a huge database of personal information. Why else would they hack the OPM? Why else would they want the personal records of federal employees, those with security clearances, some of the most sensitive information, as somebody who's filled these things out quite a bit, criminal history, all your education, everything about you when you apply for a security clearance is in the database they took, all the way down to fingerprints. There's no real financial benefit to that. This isn't something that they can hand over to their industry. So use your imagination as to what they're doing there. Personally, I think they're probably going to use it for espionage purposes, blackmailing people, taking information from the medical databases, the OPM databases, all these other things that they're hacking to use to their benefit. But it's not just China. China is the biggest problem. Russia's there too. Russia has traditionally been a lot quieter than China. China, until recently, hasn't really started to cover its tracks. They're out there, they're very loud, they really don't care who knows. Now with the latest state visit, I think that might change a little bit. But Russia's always been there. They're better, they're quieter, but we don't see them in as many places. Russia also plays with the organized crime. A lot of the same people that we see going after state-sponsored targets that are obviously state-sponsored for political reasons are also going after commercial targets, credit card numbers, things like that. So it's weird. There's sort of a hybrid threat in cyberspace. There's also other new players. There's Syria. We've seen Syria on the round. We've seen Iran. We've seen North Korea recently. Definitely a state-sponsored attack, by the way. So that's the nation-state threat. That's the threat you need to be very focused on. But there's also organized criminal groups, again, kind of in that gray area with Russia. Organized criminal groups, mostly from Eastern Europe, also from Latin America and Africa. You know, these are the groups that started stealing credit cards online, selling them for X dollars, or using them to buy stuff, shipping them somewhere, and then selling it on the black market. And that was a real nuisance to people. They've graduated. So the newest organized crime type of crime on the internet is to break into banks, law firms, insurance companies, looking at claims and things, finding pieces of non-public information that could be material to a company that they could trade on. So they're stealing information that hasn't been released yet, and they're trading on Wall Street with that information. And they're making many, many millions of dollars. If you're at all interested in more about that, look at the FIN4, the FIN4 report that FireEye published very recently. So there's also Hacktivists, the third group. I'm sure everybody here has heard of Anonymous. Some of these other, these are kind of, a lot of times, the suburbanite teenagers sitting in their parents' basement. But these are people with some type of political or social motive. Although a lot of times what we see is them breaking in wherever they can and then reverse engineering a political or social motive just so they can justify their actions. And then finally we have terrorist groups. We now see the terrorists moving into the cyber realm not just for purposes of propaganda, but also for destruction and to disseminate information. Nation states, organized criminal groups, hacktivists, terrorist group. And it's not all just about personal gain either. We've seen some disturbing trends just this last year, including the concept of doxing. So doxing is a new term coined to, and it means disclosing information on the internet about someone that they don't want disclosed. Sony Pictures, for example, just down the street. They were doxed about as large as you can get. You know, I think it was many, many gigabytes of information released. Personal, emails, everything from salaries to a lot of personal information. Also, recently, Ashley Madison. That website was hacked, and the information for every single one of their users was released online, including things down to their sexual proclivities and other things that I'm guessing people don't want released online. So that's a new trend I think we're going to see a lot more of. It's a great way to damage somebody. So even if you can't use the information to your own benefit, you can at least do that. And unfortunately, that's a trend we've seen quite a bit of. So how are we prepared to address these threats? And I guess another way of asking that question, well, one question needed to ask. Do you think think about your organization. Think about your IT department. Think about your security department if you have one. Are these people prepared to go head-to-head with a foreign military group of tens of thousands with enormous resources and that are taxed? I had the machine gun going back there. Yeah, go ahead. So this is the problem. Is your IT department ready for that type of dispute? Ready to go head-to-head with a nation state? The answer is probably no. What about your vendors? Even if you are in this top X% that really knows the threat, handles the threat, and you've got the best security team on earth, your vendors, if every single one of your vendors needs to pass the same test. We saw, I've seen many, many dozens of these examples, but the one I can give, the one that was been publicly discussed, was Target. Target was compromised through their HVAC vendor. And this goes back to everything being online, everyone being online, that interconnectivity that is so good for our economy is also bad. But you have to make sure that every single one of your vendors passes the security test as well. So how are we doing in terms of security? I'll give you some statistics. And they're actually, some of these are getting better, some of them aren't. Only 31% of victims discover breaches themselves internally. Only 31%. That leaves 69% of victims are being told that they were breached by a vendor, by a partner, unfortunately usually by law enforcement. And let me tell you, that is not a phone call you want to be on the receiving end of. The FBI has a program, a notification program, and they receive information from other agencies. And a lot of that information is, we see a suspect IP address pulling massive amounts of information out of this IP address range, which we know is a US company. They'll look at the data flow, they'll determine that it shouldn't be there, and they'll call. And they'll say, Agent so-and-so, you've been compromised, here it is. So we've done that as a company too, and this is always an interesting and unfortunate call. When you call someone and telling them that they've been compromised, it's a three-stage process. It's first disbelief. Now, who are you really? Why are you calling me? No, we haven't been compromised. We're fine. We don't see anything wrong here. Second stage, after you give them, you say, well, what's your name? So-and-so. Well, here's your password. The second stage, after they realize that you do in fact have their sensitive information, accusation. How'd you get my stuff? You broke into my network. You stole my stuff. Third stage, finally, once they hang up on you, get angry, go call the FBI, try to report you. The FBI tells them that, in fact, you're trying to do the right thing. They call you back, and then it's acceptance. But that's not a call you want to be on the receiving end of. So that's discouraging that only 31% of people find the breaches internally. But there is another statistic that I find discouraging, and that's that there are 205 days is the average, actually the median number of days that an attacker is present on a system before being discovered. 205 days. And that's the median. We've seen attackers on networks for over 8 years without being detected. And again, this goes back mostly to the nation-state stuff. We specialize in the nation-state stuff. So these are very sophisticated hackers. That is down from 24 days last year. So there is a positive trend finally. But think about how much damage an attacker can do in 205 days. We've seen these attackers in and out in just over 7 minutes, taking the crown jewels with them. And so how do these attacks happen? You know, I keep talking about sophisticated state actors and these teams of hackers in China and Russia. And, you know, you think that they'd be using the most sophisticated methods they can to hack these companies. In fact, the vast majority of them are still using phishing attacks, sending targeted emails made to look like an email from one of your colleagues, designed to make you click on a link or on an attachment. So why? Why are they using something so basic, something you and I could probably derive in our basement? Because it works. It's exactly right. Why would you send a tank when a slingshot will do? They have resources, vulnerabilities, other things that they can use for those companies that have good defenses for things like phishing. But there's no reason to pull out the big guns and to waste those weapons if phishing does it. And humans always continue to remain the weakest link in the chain. Technology is good. Humans are gullible. I've gotten these emails before, and I've either clicked on them or come close to clicking on them because some of them are so well designed. But as long as there are humans in the equation, we will be vulnerable. So given all that, going back to risk management and the people that are at this conference, if I were an underwriter and I were trying to gauge a company's cybersecurity risk posture, what would I do? Now, a lot of times the answer is, well, the first thing you do is do a penetration test, do a vulnerability test, see if they are vulnerable to the types of attacks that you know are out there, the vulnerabilities that we're aware of. That's great. It absolutely needs to be done. But first, don't you think you need to do a compromise assessment, given everything that we just learned, that the average attacker is in a network for hundreds of days before they're detected? The scope of the problem. The first thing I would do is determine whether they're already compromised. And that's actually very difficult because when the attackers get into an environment, use phishing, click on a piece of malware, that malware gets them into the environment, they get a foothold, they move laterally across the entire enterprise, and they get that foothold, and then they steal credentials. It's one of the first things they do. Because then they can get rid of all the malware that they put on the system, making their presence almost entirely invisible, no malware, and then they just masquerade as a regular user. They'll get the administrator password, usernames and passwords so that they can access everything on the network. So a compromise assessment is a lot more these days than just running a virus scanner or any sort of malware detection, because once they're in, they generally eject that. So a good comprehensive compromise assessment is the first thing I would do. And then how do you tell whether they're actually doing what they need to do going forward? And traditionally, it's been about perimeter defenses. The Maginot Line, anybody remember that from history class? Build up a big wall, they'll never get over it. They don't have to. Just like the Germans went right around the Maginot Line, bad guys are going right around the defenses that we build. This is your antivirus, your firewall, the stuff that you probably still need to some extent, but you cannot rely on. Moving forward, it's a lot more about process, people, technology, and intelligence. So people, you'd have to have good security people, and you have to have people that are dedicated to security. You have to have, in terms of process, a comprehensive risk management program. And when I talk about intelligence, I'm talking about intelligence sharing. You need to talk to other people in the industry. The insurance industry, for example, needs to communicate the different risks that it's seeing so that an attack that worked on insurance company A yesterday won't work on insurance company B today, because they're just going to continue using the same attacks as long as they can. And it's not all about prevention. you're not going to prevent every attack. You absolutely have to have a comprehensive program where you're looking for intruders inside your walls. We call that hunting. You have to have a team that's going to be hunting around, looking for the guys that got over the wall. You have to be proactive about it. And you have to eliminate the consequences of a breach before they walk away with the crown jewels. And it's not only possible, it's very possible. So it's not a lost cause. Although some of them are going to get over the wall, you can eject them from your network before they do a lot of harm. All right. I'm going to wrap up here just because I don't think we have a whole lot more time. So in summary, it's a tough world out there right now. And if I were in the shoes of people that are gauging risk and underwriting companies out there, you need to understand that prevention, 100% prevention, is now impossible. But there are other things you can do to mitigate the damages that come from a compromise. And because there will always be risk here, and the risk is significant, we see many more of our customers allocating some portion of that risk through cyber insurance. And frankly, I'm glad to see that. So thank you very much. Appreciate you having me. Enjoy the rest of the conference.